Welcome to the April 4th service event of the North Texas Church of Freethought. It is Easter 2021. Supposedly the holiest and most important day of the year for Christians and Christianity, which we'll come to in a bit, but we'll just start off by noting that Easter is the name of the goddess. So this is why it's called Easter. It's a proper name, the name of this goddess. And you can find things like this all over the internet that conflate Easter. She's there on the second from the bottom line, just right of center. And don't get hung up on the spelling. English spelling is a whole other subject for another time, but just realize that spelling in English, it's still a little screwy. We don't spell color the same as the British do, for example, but none of this spelling was standardized, even as much as it is now, until the early 19th century or so. So remember, the purpose of the alphabet was for people to be able to sound out and reproduce the sounds. It was the pronunciation that mattered more than the spelling. But most people were not readers back in the day. So what you see here is a conflation of many different deities that share mainly just the fact that they're female. And here's another one. Of course, since it's on the internet, it's the truth, right? You'll notice I do throw in some sarcasm. If it's on the internet, it's probably wrong, in fact. On the other hand, if it's not on the internet, what? It never happened? It doesn't exist? It's not important? Or maybe just no one thought of it yet. This one is on the ancient Canaanite goddess Asherah, mentioned in the Old Testament, and it is a bit of a sound-alike. Asherah and Ishtar are probably related, same part of the world, and different peoples there had similar gods. Asherah was Yahweh's wife. Well, what's the point of God being male without his having a partner? People do create deities in their own image after all, and if someone insists that he, God, is neither male nor female, then just try them out. Start calling it she and her and see what sort of response you get. So the slide before the last one mentioned Constantine and said that he was the one that brought Easter into Christianity. Now, Constantine could easily be credited with Christianity almost as much as Paul. But no, the resurrection of Jesus was apparently being observed in the 2nd century, long before the Council of Nicaea that Constantine called. But the Easter was not celebrated right after it supposedly happened, oddly enough. So this would be kind of like not celebrating someone's birthday until they were elderly. What's up with that? Easter is nowhere mentioned in the Bible except as a mistranslation of Passover in Acts and only in the King James Version. This passage here that we see on screen relates to the Council of Nicaea, called and conducted by Constantine in 325 CE, which, among other things, included controversy over the date of Easter. Naturally, those involved were not English speakers, so they never would have said the word Easter. But as we know, they argued then about many things that now seem absurd, although Goddists have yet to run out of things that are absurd that they nevertheless consider to be of the greatest importance. This passage is by a 20th century scholar, a guy named Boyle, Isaac Boyle. He hints at one of the problems with dating Easter, which was and is that the Hebrew calendar is based on lunar months, which do not easily fit into the solar year. More on the moon later, I promise. But now, if the resurrection of Jesus was a historical event, then it should not be so hard to determine its date. After all, today's date, April 4th, we know in 503 BCE was the day that Roman consul Agrippa Menenius Lenatus was ceremonially honored for his military defeat of the Sabines in Italy. And this coming Tuesday was the date in 46 BCE that Caesar fought and defeated Scipio and Cato the Younger at the Battle of Thapsus. But the date of the resurrection of Jesus seems to be like the date that young Arthur pulled the sword Excalibur from the anvil atop the stone, or the date that Paul Bunyan met and became friends with Babe the Blue Ox, or the date that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer began to be appreciated because finally he was serving some purpose. He was of some use to Santa. As we know, the only accounts of the most stupendous event in history, according to Christians, that no historians noticed at the time, are the devotional religious texts written by unknown persons known as the Gospels. And we see here some accounting of how these different accounts conflict with one another. Now, I've seen things on the webs where people say, oh, but people naturally disagree about things that happen, so that those disagreements prove that it really did happen. But I mean, remember, the writers, whoever they were supposed to be inspired, divinely inspired. So if somebody made a mistake, how could that be? Of course, there are still many defenders of the claim that Easter is and can only be a celebration of the Christian doctrine of Jesus' resurrection. But there is no getting around the fact that the major holidays are rooted in the seasons and therefore in sun worship. And idolatry, the word and the idea anyway, if not the reality, is always an easy target. Kind of like philanthropy. Remember the case in which one politician attacked another saying that his opponent was a philanthropist. It just sounds evil. Meanwhile, Ishtar's symbols are not bunnies and eggs, but they're lions. Ishtar also had wings and bird feet, as you see in this rendition. And look at what we see on Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman, the 8-pointed star of Ishtar. Well, okay, here comes some more sarcasm now. It only makes sense if you put things like that on your stuff, that it's an open invitation for the devil to just come right in. This image in text was said to have been circulated by the Richard Dawkins organization, and it certainly is the sort of thing that appeals to many atheists. You see lots of these things on atheist discussion boards. But it's doubtful at best, no matter how many people say it and no matter how often they say it. QAnon and the wokists are far from the only offenders against facts and reason. But it's so easy to accept things that seem like they could be true, but often those things are not true. So don't be so quick to believe things. This is what we always say at the Church of Freethought. So who was Easter? Again, don't get hung up on the spelling. This is one of the only decent artistic conceptions of Easter that I could find online. Keep that in mind when people talk about how religious art, that the Christianity inspired all this beautiful religious art, because people forget all the beautiful art that it suppressed, all the things that artists did not draw pictures of because it wasn't orthodox. Easter was said to have been a Germanic goddess of the East, and it is from her name that we get the word East, because that's where the sun rises. She was apparently referred to as the goddess of the golden dawn. The only reason we know of her, and it is a good thing to have the attitude always of asking at all times and about everything, how and why do we think we know of or about something or someone? We know of her because of the 8th century monk known as Bede, or sometimes the Venerable Bede. This is an excerpt from his work in which Easter is mentioned, and this was a work about the keeping of time. Keep in mind that Easter is a Germanic Anglo-Saxon word. The Latin for Easter is Pascha, or Festa Paschalia, and I might be mispronouncing some of this. In French, it's Pâques. In Danish, it's Paski. In Finnish, it's Pasainian, and in Greek, it's Pascha. So if Easter came from Ishtar, how did all these other languages and cultures get skipped over? And you see here, Bede tells us about Easter only because their equivalent of the month of April was named after that goddess. Jacob Grimm, more accurately Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm, one of the brothers Grimm and a student of folklore and language in Germany, traveled all over Germany in his day collecting oral traditions and had this to say, that Easter was the divinity of the radiant dawn, of upspringing light and a spectacle that brings joy and blessing. But of course, anything can be connected to anything. Some say that El and Yahweh Jehovah are the same as Jesus and the Platonic Logos, and that these are the same as Allah. Others will vehemently deny that. People cannot even agree about who or what any single one of these deities is. But there's certainly more reason to connect these characters than to connect Easter with Ishtar. And as a somewhat relevant aside, I'll just, if you've seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the family patriarch in that movie, he claims that every word there is comes from Greek. He's a real Greek chauvinist. And one of the women in the film challenges him, well, explain how the word kimono comes from Greek. Undaunted, he explains that the Greek word for winter is kimonos. And what do you need to wear in the winter, he asks. And then he answers, a robe. That's the sort of logic, sarcasm again, that's the kind of logic we're often up against in the world. And it is everywhere. So don't get too upset about it. But that is Easter. It's always been and probably always will be really whatever anybody wants it to be. That's kind of how religion is, as compared to science. But while everyone is entitled to their own feelings and preferences, no one is entitled to their own facts, unless they're facts about your personal experience. The first falls into the category of religion, which we can still talk about and share, but the second is reality, and we must all face reality and take reality as it is. Reality, of course, comes with a lot of maybes, to be sure, but we should be sure to realize that maybes are not certainties and often not even more likely than nots. I said I would come back to the moon. The moon is rather unusual. Also quite important, we think, not just culturally, but from the standpoint of its influence on the history of life on our planet. As we know, it tugs on the Earth and creates the tides. You can't have tidal pools without the tides of the moon. The sun creates some tidal force, but not as much as the moon. And the moon was much closer to the Earth at one time. It's currently receding about 3.8 centimeters annually. So just like with the Big Bang, we see things receding from each other and we say, well, long ago they must have been much closer. We can say the same thing of the moon. The moon is very large for a natural satellite. It's larger than Pluto, so all the people who were disappointed when Pluto got demoted, I suppose, should be clamoring that the moon be made an official planet. How is it that we have our moon? And people have long speculated about this. Perhaps the Earth and the moon formed together at the same time. Or perhaps the Earth's gravity captured the moon at some point in its history. George Darwin, the fifth child of Charles Darwin, there he is at the top left, he seems to be the first to have speculated that the Earth spun off the moon long ago from its own mantle material. And he was looking for a way to account for the fact that it was known even then that the moon is much less dense than the Earth. But it's really hard, it has been really hard to make that idea work in terms of the physics. Then came the Apollo missions, beginning with the landing of Apollo 11 in 1969. The Apollo astronauts brought back thousands of physical pieces of the moon, weighing altogether well over 800 pounds in Earth gravity. These samples showed a close similarity between themselves, the lunar material and terrestrial material. And in fact, at first they thought there was a near identity. Although the lunar material is much drier and it shows the effects of extreme heat in a near vacuum, almost as if it had at some point been exposed to thousands of degrees of heat and causing the volatiles to be driven off. And this gave rise to the giant impact hypothesis of the formation of the moon. The idea here is that in the early stages of the formation of the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized or maybe larger protoplanet collided with the still mostly molten Earth. Such an impact would have blown off a large part of the mantles, the outer portions of both the Earth and the other body. So there's your mechanism for material that's been heated to something like 5,000 degrees. Part of Earth's atmosphere then became basically vaporized rock. But this material eventually coalesced into the moon. The theoretical protoplanet that smashed into the Earth is referred to as Theia, after the Greek mother of the moon goddess, Selene. Theia, T-H-E-I-A. And that's what you see here is currently thought to be the best hypothesis of the origin of the moon, and it accounts for many facts about the Earth-Moon system, that the Earth and Moon were much closer, the lack of volatiles in the moon material, and so forth. I have a video to show you next. John's going to get that ready to show, which will basically be an animation of what the collision may have looked like all those billions of years ago. Anytime you're ready, John, I think I need to stop sharing and then you start sharing.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. All ears, take it away. You do that full screen? There we go. music, I think. Pretty violent in there. So that video is available on YouTube if you want to watch it again and maybe get a little better sound quality. Of course, as with all speculative ideas, this giant impact theory has its problems. Maybe the biggest problem is, what happened to Theia? What happened to this alien world that smacked into, quote unquote, our planet? Those billions of years ago, long before there was any life on Earth, and thank goodness before anybody was subjected to that. Recently, it has been suggested that Theia may have been found. You see, data collected from seismometers all over the world for a long time, monitoring earthquakes, have built up a map of the interior of the Earth. You see on the lower right there. And this is how we know that the crust, the continents, and the ocean floors float on a mantle of rock and magma, and at the center of the Earth, a core of mostly iron, and then an inner core, which is thought to be perhaps a giant crystal of iron. But there are these anomalies in the deep mantle, referred to as large low shear velocity provinces, or LLSVPs. And you see how the seismometers can pick these up depending on where the earthquake waves are passing. No one's quite sure what they are, but they've been mapped out to some degree. You see in the red there, the red zones show where they appear to be. Scientists think that these may be chunks of subducted crust, pieces of the Earth's crust that have been recycled into the interior of the planet. We know this happens, and we know where it happens, just as we know how and where new crust is formed at the mid-ocean ridges, as shown here. But, of course, for the Earth to be able to keep its same size and rough shape as new crust is formed, these, you see the subduction zone where the crust is then recycled back into the mantle. But these LLSVPs seem awfully deep to be recycled crust. They're far too deep to be able to sample directly. And they don't seem to be connected necessarily to where subduction has been happening. That's not to say that they can't be recycled crust, or they could be something else, these LLSVPs, that nobody has yet thought of. Well, not long ago, in 2016, some brilliant scientists created this three-dimensional picture of these LLSVPs. This is on the Wikipedia entry on LLSVPs, by the way. And even more recently, just last month, in fact, it was suggested that these large, low shear velocity provinces may be the remains of the deeper regions of a protoplanet that collided with, and as it happens, contributed to the mass of the early planet Earth, as well as to the material blown off into space from both bodies that coalesced into the moon. So you may be looking there at the outlines of a quote-unquote alien world, not really alien because it's part of the Earth, that lies buried beneath our feet. No more alien, though, than all the other material that our planet has swept up and incorporated into its mass as part of and since its formation. Pretty amazing and fascinating if you think about that. And this may or may not turn into something more that we actually know about our planet that we can believe or be certain of, and its peculiar moon. But it's another way to think about the riddle of the moon. And this is what an atheist church is about, for those who wonder. More accurately, this is how a church of people who are unafraid to say, I don't know, or just, yes, maybe. When have you ever had Goddists say that? Yeah, maybe it could be, but I don't know for sure. But we like to think in different directions and consider different ideas, different perspectives, and especially to look at how our thoughts relate to our deepest values. And these are our principles, which we put up and try to restate in slightly different ways each time. Reason, because that's our best tool for making sense of things. Because the point of it all is to pursue happiness, to enjoy what we have, what limited existence we know of, our ability to comprehend the universe and ourselves, and to appreciate what is good about our existence, and of course, the opposite, to realize and recognize what are problems so that we can try to address them, if not correct them. And finally, love, which is our exploration of what meaning and purpose there is to be had in our existence. You know, if there was an eternity to follow the existence that we know, it wouldn't even matter anything to happen here on this earth, all the problems that people talk about. It's because our existence is ephemeral, short, temporary, that things matter so much. And we're going to move on here in a little bit to some discussion about these and other things, whatever anybody wants to talk about, but remember, let's not to let politics spoil civility. I think obviously we agree pretty well when it comes to religion, and maybe related to that, we don't really argue about sex much, but politics definitely can spoil civility. It's not a subject that unites freethinkers or really members of any other religious tradition, it seems, and it really seems like Christianity and other religions are split into pieces based on their approach to politics and how other people should be treated, whether or not gays and lesbians and so forth should be treated as fellow human beings or not. There are some principles of civility, and we put these up in the past. Let's take two more today out of 15 that we put up in the past. Apologizing and asserting. These may seem very different, but they're really two sides of the same coin, and this is why. Because the whole point of interacting with each other is to understand others. For us to understand them and for them to understand us, and often we fail at this. And we want to be understood, and sometimes others take us to mean what we do not mean. So in that case, we have to assert, no, you're mistaken, that's not what I intended to mean. And at the same time to apologize, I'm sorry, I did not realize that you meant something different. I took you to mean this, but clearly it's something else. Please explain again. This is how we ought to be interacting with each other. Too bad Jesus never talked about this. He should have. It would have saved us all a lot of trouble had he given some good guidelines for this. Might have saved a lot of people being burned at the stake and have their tongues cut out and so forth. But remember, we want to assume the best of others, that misunderstandings are not intentional. We do not intend to misunderstand, and we should take someone else's lack of understanding not as being intentional or deliberate. Another important principle of civility is that we are not disembodied minds. We're not wholly rational, and we're incapable of being wholly rational. We don't claim to be completely rational. We just try to do the best we can, because we reason, we think, and we believe with what is intrinsically flawed wetware, the tissue between our ears. It did not evolve in order to create the kind of world that we would like to have. It evolved and was very much suited to a very different kind of world of long ago. When we undertake to understand others, we need to remember too that we need to, in some sense, lay our own views aside. Don't let our own views filter what other people are saying. To some degree, that's unavoidable, but we have to make the effort. None of us knows so much as to be out of danger, if it's true that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And let me conclude by reminding everyone that free thought is not free. Your donations, freely given at www.churchoffreethought.org. You can contribute through the PayPal link. That's the easiest way. Or you can just box up a big container of cash and bullion and so forth and send it to our mailing address also at that website. Because this church does depend on your continued support, just like all churches do, but it's not a money maker. We just would like to meet expenses and try to get the word out so more of us can get together. Visit us on Facebook and Twitter. They're not high traffic sites to be sure, but there's a lot of good material out there, and we do post from time to time things that we come across that are of interest. Our church depends on your continued support, financial and otherwise, and I put the emphasis then on otherwise. It's not just by your financial contributions that we look for support. You can accomplish valuable things with your financial support. Do something useful with your money. Maybe something better than your last expenditure. Think about what that might have been by supporting the NTCOF. We can do together what none of us can do on our own. And also, there's a special discount. I announced this, I think, last time or the time before last. Use this code ThinkNow, and you only have to tithe 8%. It's a full 20% discount from the 10% tithing. If you detected some sarcasm there, you are correct. But the bottom line is to help us promote your values. Demonstrate your commitment and be the future you wish to see. Don't just put your light under a rock, under a bushel, and expect the world to get better, because it's not going to get better without all of our efforts. So thank you very much and good morning, and we'll move on then to question and answer discussion, which we don't post on YouTube, but sign up at our church website, at the bottom of every page, get the emails that will tell you about how to go and sign on to the Zoom meeting that we have each Sunday. Thank you again.